Why do gypsies, Romani people get married so young and don't go to school? Not sure why they marry so young. But where I am from, Serbia, most of them quit before high school because of family issues, while I only know one guy who actually finished high school but lost contact after him soon after that. It's part of their tradition. I don't know in which country you are. In most countries in Europe they didn't really mix with the rest. Have their own language. Marry between them. Drop out of school at 12. And soon get married and have kids. At least this is what happened to my Roma girlfriends, classmates when we were kids. The ones who say yeah but X and Y graduated and such. Good for them. They must have been in a good, Roma family. Most of them are not like this. I have seen this tradition in many European countries despite the level of racism towards them being low or high. Maybe it's a cultural thing in some way? When your parents don't have a high education, you're even less likely to get a high education yourself. For generations they may have been unable to go to school. Maybe because they moved a lot, were poor and had to get jobs early, or were barred from schooling due to racism. For the marriage thing, I believe it's common to get married young when you're less educated. Not because you're more stupid, but because you're in a different life stage. As an anecdotal example, my partner's best buddy is 21 and is engaged. Both him and his fiancée went to trade school at 16 and have stable, full-time jobs. My partner and I, on the other hand, are the same age. But I'm a student and will likely not have a proper job until I'm 25. For us it doesn't feel right yet. But for them they're already proper adults. Well, as a traveler who knows a lot of Romani people, a lot of us actually did go to school but were taken out after 5th grade. We get married younger because most of us are traditional Catholic Christians and we know most of our potential partners from birth. Most the time. We also live together in the same towns, at least for part of the year, and stick to our own because that's the way it's always been. We know all of our friends, potential partners from the beginning. We know who we're getting involved with. Most the time. We usually have the same values, the same opinions, the same way of life, so it's easier. Everyone's mostly happy with the way things are. But occasionally you'll get someone who doesn't want to get married and be a mom. Doesn't want to do the same family trade work as their fathers. Or just doesn't want to be a traveler, Romani anymore at all. And they'll go off and get married to a country person. Or just live as a country person with a regular job. Most the time they face a lot of backlash from family. Because leaving the community means you won't see your family as often as they'd like. You'll probably not see your old friends because they pretty much only attend traveling, Romani events. Marrying a country person isn't wrong but usually frowned upon because they usually don't understand or want to be a part of the community, so you'll most likely have to live as a country person unless you find someone who wants to be a part of the community. But then it's hard on the outsider because mostly everyone else already knows each other or knows of each other. There are also lots of different subcommunities within the traveling Romani culture, so even within our own, there's a lot of "they're not our people," so even if you're not a country person you might still face some sort of discrimination. It's weird. Overall, it's not terrible being a traveler, Romani. But there's good and bad in every culture. A lot of the time I feel like it would be a much harder life to be a country person, but I guess it just depends on the person. But country people definitely have much more freedom to do what they want. Girls, at least in our sub-community, aren't allowed to drink. A lot sneak. Boys aren't allowed to do drugs. Some still sneak. But in other communities the girls are completely allowed to drink. Every traveling Romani community or group has their own set of rules. But then, I'm only talking about American travelers, Romanis. and some from Ireland. So if you ask this to a Romani, gypsy, from Romania, I'm sure they'll have a different answer. BTW. I do believe the Romanical people from Romania do not appreciate being called a gypsy. American Romani, at least the groups I know personally, don't care, as they have taken the slur back and use it amongst themselves. Again, I'm a traveler, so we're a bit ethnically different, but we've been called gypsy as well. I used to get harassed in some schools and called a gypsy on a daily basis. But it doesn't bother me anymore. It's cultural, influenced by traditional Roma values, cemented by long-standing discrimination, and intensified by the kind of insularity that comes from being a small community that consciously considers itself to be other from the majority of inhabitants' mainstream culture wherever they live. Beyond the not inconsiderable issues of poverty and cycles of exclusion, forced assimilation, formal education traditionally hasn't been highly valued by Roma culture because the main purpose of it is to expand one's opportunities for working. And as others have pointed out, being in a profession or being a steady employee for someone else is looked down on for men. And, for traditionalists, at any rate, forbidden for women. Where some cultures, subcultures value financial stability and respectability, and others value conspicuous consumption. Traditional Roma culture values freedom and sharp dealing, where you're not tied down by money or possessions and you can trust your wits to get you through whatever comes your way. Amish kids also don't get much or any education beyond the age of 13-14 because they are supposed to be young adults at that point, and they take on more work responsibilities. Early marriage isn't uncommon either, but because they live in settled communities, practice farming, and generally have values a little bit closer to those of the people around them, they don't face the same kind of ingrained mistrust and dislike that is common for the Roma to experience. And of course, that mistrust and dislike, coupled with a long history of violence being meted out against the Roma basically just for existing, breeds intergenerational bitterness that perpetuates a cycle of alienation and mutual predation. A lot of it is cultural norms. But getting married, having kids young can be a result of lack of education, or at least prioritization of it. So the two things are intertwined. The podcast, Foretold, goes into this. It's an in-depth interview with a Romani person who left the culture. Basically, they think schools taint you against their religious and cultural values. And those values include marrying young and having big families. Being exposed to outsiders is considered bad and to a large extent unclean, unhygienic. They find indoor pets disgusting. For instance, they send their kids to school until grade 4 or 7 because the government pays for every child monthly. The money drops after grade 7, so they just send their kids to steal or beg on the streets. Usually, it's not very encouraged to give them money as they just keep getting sent to work the same places. If it gets them money, most people try to give them food instead. Where I'm from, gypsies have almost no desire to work. There are literal gangs of thieves around and shops have to pay for protection. Like a mafia, I guess. This is first-hand knowledge, BTW. All of it. As you can imagine, their reputation isn't the best about early marriage. They sell brides. Color it, however you like. There's a literal festival about it here. In case you wonder. Yes, human trafficking is high in my country. But it's not just that. Probably the lack of education and availability of contraceptives adds to it. My family's Roma. All of us went to school and none of us kids got married. Even in immediate family such as cousins, none of them got married young or left education. Think it's just a people thing rather than a cultural thing, and if it is a cultural thing, my guess Is people just refusing to adjust to the way of the world cause we are better off with an education and not married young? Which country are you in? It varies. Coincidentally, I was just watching the Furies Netflix series, which addresses some gypsy education and family beliefs at times. Tyson, Gypsy King, Fury and his wife are both gypsies, and even with their level of money they are raising their kids the same way. So it's not a discrimination thing like another commenter said. In England, other countries' traveler communities may be different, but in England it's what they do because of their beliefs, not because they can't afford school. Their daughter is turning 12 or 13 soon, and they will be taking her out of school, and she will focus on cooking and housework related skills. Also in the series, Tyson's brother Tommy is having a baby with a non-gypsy, an influencer, but legitimately successful woman who used social media, not the eye-roll stereotype influencer. And she discusses how their child will be going to school beyond 12, and anyway, it's also interesting listening to a non-gypsy in a gypsy family. Not an expert, but I'm guessing the education thing is due to centuries of ongoing discrimination. From the show I watched about UK folks in this culture on TLC, the reason why they marry so young is because sex is forbidden unless you are married. They almost always seems to also get divorced fast, and often, so this sex-marriage loophole seems stupid. Many of my family are Irish travelers. Not the same, but they are similar in the way that their traditions don't really meld with wider society. For them, they tend to, though not always, marry young because they were raised to adore children and see raising a child as the best thing a person can do. The notion of being childless is taboo. There were no arranged marriages or such in my family, and everyone was 18 plus. However, there was an undeniable subtle pressure to get married and have kids, only reinforced by biological clock comments. The pressure was much less for the men than the women. As for education, when I was young, people like us weren't welcome in universities, etc. We couldn't afford it anyhow. The notion of going to university was a pipe dream. Many of my family didn't even finish school. Most people in my family agreed school was important, but people like us tended to get a bit lost in the system. And the school system itself didn't really care about us. Oftentimes teachers were happier if we didn't attend. We were the weird kids, the misfits that polite society didn't want to deal with. When I went to university, it was a big deal. I was the first person to finish high school, let alone get a degree. I saw other students didn't value their degrees nearly as highly, drinking and partying. While I spent a lot of time studying, I wanted to learn, and I knew how difficult the journey has been to get there. Mostly because teachers and staff often didn't like people like me, and they treated me like I was a stupid troublemaker. My niece is nearing end of her high school, and she is living in a different world to the one I grew up in. She's been talking about going to university, and first time she mentioned it, I was in tears. My mom still holds the view that you need to be exceptionally clever to get into university, and A levels are only for smart people. Nowadays in the UK, education from 16-18 is compulsory. A levels. When I was young, that wasn't the case. I think that has leveled the playing field a bit. It hasn't solved the problem of discrimination in education. I still see people like me unfairly punished and locked up in cleaning cupboards and such for the most minor infraction, while their peers get away with murder. I think the education system as a whole needs to try a lot harder, and I don't think they're doing enough. Instead, they choose to blame the victims. Lack of education on the downsides to child brides and having children before you're done growing. Or culture. Because it's deeply ingrained in their toxic culture to leech off of the society they've attached themselves too. The ones who do that are living under backwards traditions from bygone eras based on exploitation.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.